Thank you for joining us for the Drive Green Ottawa speaker series today with Raymond Leury, President of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, or as we call it, EVCO. For those of you who don't know us, EnviroCentre is a nonprofit environmental organization based here in Ottawa. Our core mission supports sustainable lifestyles, which means that we encourage people to take action on climate in their own lives, in their homes, their workplaces and businesses, their communities, and of course right here in our city. Our work focuses on 4 key areas: green homes, green transportation, green business, and green lifestyle. And of course, today we're here to talk about green transportation in Ottawa, but specifically zero emissions, low carbon transportation. Before we get started and I make a proper introduction of our speaker, I just wanted to go over a couple quick logistical notes. Please note, first of all, that this session is being recorded and will be shared online after the event. We ask that everyone please keep themselves muted during the presentation portion so that everyone is able to hear Raymond speaking clearly. And we'll be monitoring for questions in the chat box. So please don't hesitate to type them there throughout the presentation. We'll bring them forward at the end for a Q&A period or live questions as time allows, just depending on how the presentation goes. So without further ado, our speaker today, Raymond, is now retired, but has had a career as an IT consultant for over 25 years, consulting to both private sector and public sector clients throughout Canada and the United States. Raymond has always been interested in environmental issues, and that has led him to purchase an EV 8 years ago and to get involved with EV owners groups, where he now occupies the position of president for the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. Raymond attended Al Gore's Climate Reality Project Leadership Corps, which reignited his passion for environmental issues, in particular the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Raymond splits his time between advocating for EVs, talking climate change, and volunteering with the Red Cross, most recently in the COVID-19 efforts. Sorry about that. Once again, welcome to everyone in the audience. Thanks for joining us today. And Raymond, you have the digital floor. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Evan, for the introduction. So let me bring up my screen here. So as Evan said, I'm the president of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa. And today we'll talk about what is it like to own an EV. So as Evan said, I've had an EV for 8 years now, and I talk to EV owners all the time at many EV events that we do throughout the year. So hopefully we'll be able to answer many of the questions you have and be able to give you an impression of what it's like to own an EV. So in terms of agenda, we'll talk about EVCO a bit and what we are, where we come from. Then we'll discuss the types of zero emission vehicles that are available in Canada, and then we'll focus in on the battery electric vehicls. Then we'll talk about the differences between internal combustion engine. So ICE refers to internal combustion engine, and we'll look at the differences between them and electric vehicles. Then we'll talk about specific advantages of EVs. And to finish off, we'll talk about fueling or charging the vehicles both at home and on the road. So those are the questions. Most of the questions I get have to do with range and charging the vehicle. So we'll cover those, and then we'll be happy to take questions afterwards. So EVCO, we've been around for about 40 years now, actually. That's 40, yes, 40 years. So originally it was a group of geekish people who were interested in converting gas vehicles to electric vehicles. We since evolved into an organization that is promoting electric vehicles for a number of reasons. They're actually better. Electric vehicles are better than either gas or diesel vehicles in every way except one, and we'll discuss that when we talk about charging on the road. So they're better vehicles. They're economical because you save a lot on operation costs. So some of the vehicles today in their categories are actually cheaper over their life cycle than the equivalent gas or diesel vehicle. And we expect that to continue getting better over time as battery prices go down. So it's economical, it's ecological, it's practical, and it's there now. And it actually, transportation accounts for the largest part of an individual's carbon footprint in their daily lives. So it's an easy way for people to reduce their greenhouse gases. And if you're interested, we have meetings every last Monday of the month, and it turns out that tonight is our next monthly meeting. And if you want information on that to get to the meeting, you could go to our website at evco.ca. And just a note on the fact that we are looking at the transportation system as a whole, not just light vehicles, so not just personal vehicles. We're looking at other things. So we ran a campaign over the last 2 years to convince OC Transpo to transition to electric buses, and we are happy to note that they have decided to do that over earlier this summer. So we're going to see them transition their whole fleet to electric buses. And of course, if you have questions on that, I'd be happy to answer questions on that also. So let's go through the types of zero emission vehicles that are out there today. So if you would have asked me 15 years ago, what would be the vehicle, zero emission vehicle that you should be buying, I would have told you, or that would win the race in this space, I would have told you that hydrogen fuel cell vehicles would win because at that time we thought that those were the best option available to us. Now, something has happened in the last 15 years, which is that batteries have developed considerably. Both the capabilities and the prices of batteries have developed greatly, and that's meant that hydrogen fuel cells have now been supplanted in terms of efficiency, cost, and just about every measure you could look at. So hydrogen fuel cells, we don't see that as being practical for light vehicles. In fact, we only think that they'll be practical in niche applications over time, and they're not truly zero emissions. So they are zero emission at the tailpipe. However, most of the hydrogen produced today is produced using hydrocarbons. So there are CO2 emissions associated with the production of hydrogen today, so they're not truly zero emissions. Just wanted to touch on the conventional hybrids to essentially say that we are excluding them from the discussion here. So conventional hybrids will help reduce fuel consumption, especially within city streets, but they're not zero emissions. So an example of those is the Toyota Prius, which has been around for almost 20 years, I think now. It does reduce consumption in town, but it does not eliminate consumption of fuel. And what we're looking at is to eliminate greenhouse gases. So to do that, we have two categories. So the plug-in hybrids, the plug-in hybrids, what they have is they have as their name says, you could plug them in and charge the battery from the grid, and you could achieve somewhere between 20 to 90 kilometers on electricity alone. So that depends on the vehicle, depends on conditions, driving conditions, temperature, and all that. But essentially, they're short-range electric, and then they have a nice engine that will extend the range. So examples of those are the Chrysler Pacifica, and if you're looking for a minivan, actually, at this point in time in North America, that would be the best choice to reduce greenhouse gases. It's quite an interesting vehicle. Pricing is good and all that. Another example is a Toyota Prius Prime, which just came to market, I believe, last year or the year before. And it's a relatively short range plug-in hybrid. What we'll focus in on the presentation is battery electric vehicles, the last category here. So these are fully electric vehicles, so 100% electric battery powered vehicles. And examples there are the Nissan Leaf, which has been in market for over 10 years now, the Chevy Bolt, which has been in market 4 years, I believe, and all the Tesla models. So Tesla only produces electric vehicles, contrary to most other manufacturers, which have a gas and diesel history. Okay, so we'll concentrate on the battery electric vehicle, and of course I'll take questions on plug-in hybrids if you do have some, or hydrogen or whatever else you want to talk about, but we'll focus on battery electric going on. So what are the differences between driving gas, diesel, or electric? Well, the reality is the driving experience is almost the same, but I say but faster. The reason I put but faster there is because most people, when they talk about electric cars, they talk about the fact that you have full torque at zero, so they're all very fast to take off from a light or from a standing stop. So so if you're if you like performance, electric vehicles are for you. I'm not saying you should switch an electric vehicle to get better performance or better speed, but contrary to some people's belief that electric vehicles or glorified golf carts. They are not. They are all, even the less performing ones, such as the Nissan Leaf or the older Nissan Leafs in particular, with small batteries and older electric technology. It's still a fast vehicle. It still will out accelerate most vehicles on the street today. So the driving experience is essentially about the same as it would be for a gas car. One thing that's different is that you get what is often referred to as one pedal driving, or a variation of that. And essentially what that means is that when you take your foot off the accelerator, the car will start regenerating electricity from the kinetic energy and slow down the vehicle. So it's possible with many vehicles to only use one pedal to drive. So the vehicle, if you're not stopping very fast, and again, this will depend on the vehicle, you could just take your foot off the accelerator to stop the vehicle completely. Okay, so the advantage there is that you're regenerating electricity, which gives you extra range, but also it reduces the wear on your brakes, and we'll talk about that in the maintenance section here. So if you look at maintenance for an electric vehicle, the engine in an ICE vehicle has got 2,000 to 3,000 moving parts, depending on the engine, number of valves, and all sorts of other criteria. So lots of moving parts, but an electric motor has on the order of 20 to 30 parts, sometimes less, depends on the motor, but there are very few moving parts. So there are many less parts that could cause you problems, right? So a lot of the parts that would break on a gas engine just don't exist on an electric car, so there would be no issues with them. There's other things like oil changes, which are not required. There's no oil to change, so so there's no oil changes. No tune-ups or anything of that nature are required for these for electric vehicles. The brakes last 4 to 5 times longer. So that's because of the regenerative braking that I was talking about earlier. So my first EV, so I've got 2 now, but the first one, it's 8 years old now. It's got 278,000 kilometers on it. Excuse me. I changed the brakes about 3 months ago when it had 275,000 kilometers on it. That was the first time I changed the brakes on it. Okay, so that is true of all electric cars, and hybrids also have some measure of this, conventional hybrids, because they also do some regenerative braking. On the operating cost side, that's where the cost equation really is different, and the overall cost of ownership becomes favorable for electric vehicles. So electricity, even in Ontario, where people think that electricity rates are high, they're actually not that high. They're about average for North America, but they're much higher than Quebec, which we tend to compare ourselves against. But they're about 75 to 80% less. The cost of electricity about 75 to 80% less than the equivalent gas or diesel. And maintenance is a lot less. Like I mentioned before, the brakes last much longer, and there's none of the regular maintenance that you would do, oil change and tune-ups and all that. Okay, so the purchase price currently could be, well, is generally still a bit higher, especially in the lower price categories. But over time, you could save money by having much lower operating costs. So other advantages with EVs, essentially they're always charged in the morning. So think about it as having your car full of gas, your gas car full of gas every morning as you depart for whatever your daily activities are, right? So that means that in particular, you don't need to hurry and stop on the way to work when it's minus 20 or raining or windy outside and pump gas. You know, typically if you're charging at home, what you do is you plug your car when you get at home, and that takes only a few seconds, and you unplug it in the morning and the car is full and you're ready to go. Okay. You could preheat or pre-cool the vehicle. So even if you're in a garage, an electric vehicle doesn't emit combustion gases, so you could preheat or pre-cool the vehicle. And some of the cars, including some models of Teslas, will do that automatically. They will learn your habits and will automatically preheat or pre-cool the car, depending on the temperature inside the vehicle at the time when the vehicle is expecting you to either leave for your commute or come back from your commute. Okay. So less maintenance, I talked about that somewhat, but the other part there is for people who are less mechanically inclined. You know, you never get this story about this needle knocker thing that needs to be changed, a part that you've never heard of that the mechanic is telling you about that absolutely needs to be changed, otherwise your car is going to fall apart, right? So, having less maintenance means you're less exposed to the let's say the vagaries of getting your car maintained by you know, the local mechanic or the dealership. Okay. So let's get to charging. So I said that I wanted to talk about charging to give you an idea of what charging is like, because I get lots of questions about charging from the public. So charging I will go through a lot of details about charging, but really charging is a lot simpler than it may seem at first. Okay. So what we'll do here is we'll start by talking about level 1 and level 2 charging, and this is referred to as AC charging, so alternative current charging. So charging with the current you would have at home, for example. Okay, so level 1 is simply using a regular plug, as you see here. So it is possible, and actually many people I know, they use a regular plug to charge their EV, and that's all they've ever done, and that's plenty for their needs. If you look at the average commute of a Canadian commuter, it's about 30 kilometers both ways every day. And if you use a 120 volt plug to charge your car, you would have plenty of time overnight to recharge the car from a commute of that type, and even more actually. So if you look here, it says here it gives you a range of up to 8 kilometers per hour of charging. So if you're charging for 10 hours, that's 80 kilometers, right? So it's quite easy to get back 100 kilometers or more of range by charging on a regular outlet overnight. Okay. Now, what we recommend typically is to use level 2 charging, which is 240 volt charging, which happens up to 80 amp, but typically it's usually 30 to 40 amp. And the reason we recommend that is because it's a bit more efficient, and also it gives you some flexibility in terms of charging your vehicle. So if you want to charge overnight like I do, so I charge overnight, specifically for environmental reasons, actually, because I know that the electrical grid is cleaner at night. So I prefer to charge overnight. And also I could set up charging so that the battery is nice and warm when I leave in the morning. So a bit more flexibility. And if you need some extra top up someday, then it'll be faster than using a regular outlet. But certainly a regular outlet is fine for actually the vast majority of people who have an EV. Okay, so with the level 2 charger, you'd have a unit something like you have in the middle there, and you would potentially, one way of doing it is you have a plug, a stove plug or a dryer plug or something of that type in your garage, and you would plug the unit into that. You could also hardwire them, and you would have this connector here, which is referred to as a J1772 connector. Now, the good news on this side of charging level 1 and level 2 is that every single vehicle sold in North America has this connector or has an adapter for this connector. So if you have a charger like this at home, every car in North America will be able to use it. Okay, the one that's the oddball in this space is the Tesla vehicles, but they come with an adapter that allows you to use one of these chargers or charging stations without any problem. Okay, so there's one unique standard for all vehicles in North America for level 1 and level 2. Very easy to deal with. Okay. Where it gets a bit more complicated, and we're going to see this change over the next few years. There's quite a push to standardize connectors for high-speed charging. Europe has already done that, and we're expecting, as I say here, we're expecting this connector here to become the standard in North America. But currently, outside of the Tesla world, so I'll talk about the Tesla case in the next slide, but outside of the Tesla world, there are two different connectors that exist. There's a CHAdeMO connector here you see on the left hand, and there is the CCS combo connector you see on the right hand side. So the reason they call it well, it's not the real name of it, but we tend to call it CCS combo. It's because it's a combo of the connector you see on top there that I showed on the previous slide, the J1772. So that part here is the part you see here in the connector. I hope you're seeing, oops, I'm showing it on the wrong screen. So this part here is the part that's right here. And actually they've added some other connectors here for the high voltage connection to the car. Okay, so so that's why we call it combo. So we expect this to be the standard that will emerge as a standard for all cars, including Teslas, in North America. Okay. So when you go to a public charging station currently, what you will find typically is you'll find one of these connectors here, and you'll find multiple of these connectors here. And the CHAdeMO standard is a Japanese standard, and they're still, Japan is standardized on CHAdeMO, so they're going to keep on using that. But they are, the Japanese manufacturers are moving to CCS combo in North America. And the biggest user of CHAdeMO right now is the Nissan Leaf. And the Nissan Leaf is going to be, Nissan is moving to CCS combo with a new vehicle they're introducing this year, and in future versions of the Nissan Leaf. Okay, there's a few other manufacturers, Mitsubishi, that's using CHAdeMO, but just about everybody else is already on CCS combo. Okay. So the Tesla situation. So Tesla, for historical reasons, which I won't go through, Tesla came out with their own connector, and this is what it looks like. And this is used for every charging need that you would have with a Tesla. So just one connector does the level 1, 2, and DCFC, so DC fast charging. So Tesla superchargers use this connector. Okay, they're quite fast. The Tesla superchargers, and this connector supports that. Now it's possible also to get an adapter to use CHAdeMO to charge a Tesla vehicle. Okay, the adapter is about $600, but if you're stuck, you could always use a CHAdeMO adapter. But you'll see when we get to the next slides that there are plenty of charging options for Teslas as it is, and you would rarely need this this adapter. So Tesla, because of historical reasons, again, they have their own network of superchargers that are only at this point in North America compatible with Tesla brands. This is different in different parts of the world. They've already in Europe started integrating another connector that's standardized in Europe to their superchargers, but here they're still using the one standard that they've had for some time. But they have announced that they will open their network of superchargers to other vehicle manufacturers. So that'll have to be done with another connector. So plans aren't quite announced there, but we are expecting that'll be CCS combo that will be used by Tesla. Okay. So if you're charging on the road, okay, so charging at home, you use a 120 volt regular outlet, or you use a 220 volt level 2 charging station, and you're done, right? So for most people that have an EV, 95% or more of their charging happens at home. Okay, the only other time they need to charge elsewhere outside of home is when they're doing long trips. Okay, so so what about that, right? So if you look at there's a website called PlugShare. They also have a phone app that's that corresponds to that. PlugShare lists all of the chargers that are available in a given area, and this is an example here. This excludes Tesla chargers. These are just the non-Tesla chargers that you would typically have. And you see there's a number here. Oops, again, I'm pointing at the wrong screen. There's a number down here, 516 charging locations. And you see the area here, it includes Ottawa around here, and Toronto, and all that, right? Some parts of the US here. All the chargers in orange are high-speed chargers, Okay, so so DC fast chargers. The green ones are level 2 chargers. So slower chargers, but they're available often for free. There's many hotels that will offer charging for free. So as long as you're able to park in their parking, sometimes they charge for their parking, but a lot of them will not charge for the charging. They'll charge only for the parking. So, so you can see that there's plenty of options available. If you need to travel from Ottawa to Toronto, plenty of options along the way that you could use. And this application, PlugShare, helps you find the chargers. There's another application, it's called a Better Route Planner. And I've got a link to that at the end of the deck. It also will help you to do some route planning, and will take into consideration the vehicle you have, the climate conditions, and all that, and suggest a route and suggest where you should stop to charge your vehicle. So, so there are apps out there that will help you with that. There are some vehicles, like the Chevy Bolt in particular, has that built into the car. And Tesla also has that built into the car. Okay, so again, these here are the ones that are for non-Tesla vehicles. Okay, if we go to the next screen here, this is a map of the Tesla chargers. And you can see again that there are a large number of them. It's a bit of a hard to see all of them, there's so many of them, but suffice to say that the ones that are in red, and you see many of them around here, those are operational superchargers. So these are fast chargers for Tesla. And you see there are many of them all over the US East Coast, around Toronto, Chicago, and all that. There are some everywhere. You could go up the Trans-Canada Highway using the southern route here and use Tesla superchargers the whole way. So the availability is quite good, and the ones that are in gray here, these are planned superchargers. So you can see that even going around Gaspésie, and actually I was in Matane about a month ago, and they were building the supercharger there for Matane. So even going around Gaspésie, you'll be able to use Tesla superchargers if you have a Tesla. Okay, so travel with a Tesla is quite easy. You could use the level 2 chargers that we had on the other screen, right? All the, if I go back there a second, all the green chargers here you could use also with a Tesla, right? But you could use the Tesla specific chargers that you see here. The small blackish ones here, those are, they're level 2 chargers that are available also for Teslas. So these are what are referred to as destination chargers. So bottom line, you can see here, and if I could zoom into Toronto and show you this, you would see that there are plenty of charging options out there. People who are concerned about charging along the road really haven't seen these chargers. One of the reasons you haven't seen all these chargers is because these chargers are not advertised anywhere. The charging providers don't need to advertise their chargers because they know that everybody uses applications to find the chargers. So it's not like a gas station that will have a big sign showing that there's a gas station there because they want to attract your attention and get you to go and fill up there, right? The charging providers, they rely on apps showing where the charger is and people using the app to get to the charger. And that's particularly true of Tesla, which doesn't do any advertising and doesn't do any, they don't have any, there's no big signs where they have chargers. So if you've noticed some, you may have, they're red and orange. So you could, if you're close to them, you could identify them, but they're not, they don't have big display and big billboards to announce them. So the ones that are available here in Ottawa, you probably wouldn't have seen them because of that, okay? But suffice it to say that there are plenty of charging options throughout North America and actually Europe and China and many other parts of the world. So, so it's not a problem doing long distance travel. And I think that about covers it. So here I have a resource page. So I've got our website. So again, if you're interested in joining our meeting, our monthly meeting, we have one tonight, 7:30. Tonight we'll be talking about something that's related to the climate more than EVs. It's a carbon sequestration scheme that is using plants to sequester carbon. So that should be an interesting presentation. excuse me, the next link is PlugShare, which I showed you a screen of that will show you where all the charging stations are. We'll give you other information too. Their people will check in and tell you whether their experience is good at that charging station or not. They rate the chargers, so you could filter out only the chargers that have a good rating, which means that they're typically in working order and all that. So it's a good app to have. The fourth link there, a better route planner, is also another application that will help you, as I mentioned before, plan your route and find chargers. And on our website on evco.ca, we've got what we refer to as a buyer's guide. And it's got a list of all the EVs that are available in Ontario at this point. Now, there is a column at the right-hand side that shows the delay for getting a vehicle. So we've had many people in the past tell us they were having trouble finding vehicles. Fortunately, that situation is improving as the supply of vehicles is increasing. We're seeing more vehicles. So that column will tell you if it says 2 to 3 days, that's because we have confirmed that there are Ottawa dealers that have those vehicles in stock. Okay. But there's others that are still, like the Volkswagen ID4, it still hasn't been introduced in Canada yet. It will be soon, but we're hearing it's being delayed to the winter because of a shortage of chips that's slowing down manufacturing. Another thing that I wanted to note, a question I get often, what are the incentives for EVs at this point? So the federal government offers up to $1,000 rebate on eligible EVs. So again, our list, if you go to the list of vehicles we have, the buyer's guide, the ones that where the price is in green, that means that they are eligible for the $5,000 rebate. Typically, a vehicle has to retail at a base price of $45,000 or less to be eligible for the rebate. So on that, we could go to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Raymond. That was a lot of great information condensed into a very nice presentation. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. We do have some good questions in the chat. A few others here from me or anyone else, I guess, who's still out there who has questions they haven't typed out yet. So we may have time for some live questions as well. But I'll start off with a few. I got a question that I'm guessing you probably get asked fairly often, but are there any major differences from the Ottawa context about driving an EV in the winter compared to other seasons? Does it affect the range, anything else? Or what's sort of the difference between driving an electric vehicle and something else in the Ottawa winter?
So very common question. So EVs do get a range loss in winter. So when it's very cold, EVs are less efficient. This is not really that different from gas or diesel vehicles, which also have a performance penalty in the winter. However, there's a lot of FUD out there about how much of a penalty you get and all that, right? So bottom line is, if you're doing short distances, so if you're going from home to the store that's 5 kilometers away and coming back, and it's very cold, you're going to get a large penalty, a large performance penalty. You may lose 50% of range or something, but by definition, that's on a short trip. If you're doing a longer trip, and I did some experimentation with my vehicle a couple of years back. I went to Niagara Falls actually when it was minus 18 in the winter, obviously, and depending on the leg of the trip that I was measuring, I lost between 10 and 20% of range. So if you're doing a longer trip, the battery stays warmer, the vehicle cabin's already warm and all that, the bearings and the lubricants, all of that is warmer, so you lose less range, right? So the good news there is, if you're looking, if you're doing small trips, it's not a big issue because you lose range on a very small trip. If you're doing longer trips, you lose less range, but you do still lose some range in the winter. Okay.
Makes sense, and obviously a very relevant question for Ottawa and Canada more broadly, for sure. But we know what our winters are like here. If those of you up here have been through one yet, coming soon. So that was great. Thank you very much for that. A couple other questions. This one's maybe sort of related, but not necessarily seasonal. But are there any pros or cons related to charging your EV indoors versus outdoors? Say if you do or don't have a garage for your home, is it different in the different seasons? Do you have any experience with that?
Well, so so I'll say it's better if you were charging your car indoors when it's cold outside. So a couple of reasons for that. The biggest reason is that the battery typically needs to be at a certain temperature before it will charge. So if you're charging outdoors, it will be less efficient in the winter to charge your vehicle, right? So it'd be better to have it inside for that purpose. Also, the other reason is that if it's really cold and you don't want to lose much range because you're doing a long trip or something, if you start off with a hotter vehicle, then you'll lose less range, right? So it's one of the tricks if you want to get more range in cold weather, is you preheat the vehicle and you charge the vehicle right before you leave, because charging the vehicle heats up the battery, and that's a factor that will give you better range. So it is better from that perspective. However, there's really no reason why you couldn't charge a vehicle outside. There's plenty of people who don't have a garage who always have their vehicle outside.
That makes sense. My cell phone is about 5 years old now, and it also doesn't do as well in the cold as it does in the warm when it comes to battery and charging. So I assume it's a lot like something similar to that.
Well, so yeah, let's talk about that. Well, you mentioned that, because there is a big difference between EV batteries and cell phone or laptop batteries or tablet batteries. In a cell phone or a laptop and all that, there's no thermal management of the battery, whereas in an EV, except for the Nissan Leaf, every other vehicle has thermal management capabilities for the battery. So that means that the battery will not charge if it's too hot, and it will, in most cases, it will cool down the battery to be able to charge it. Or if the battery gets used too much in hot weather, it will also cool down the battery. If it's too cold in the winter, it will heat up the battery. So that protects the battery from degradation. Okay, and that's particularly important when it's really hot outside and you're doing a long trip, and driving fast and then stopping and charging fast, and then doing more fast driving and then stopping again to charge. That may lead to a battery getting very warm, and the battery management system will cool the battery to avoid degradation of the battery. So EV batteries last much longer than cell phone or tablet or laptop batteries.
That's really good to know, because it's something that I probably make that mental comparison a lot without realizing the difference there. It's amazing to see how much like new technology is in these electric vehicles. I'm always kind of fascinated by how much is going into them. Maybe the cell phone providers will catch up one day. I've got another question here in the chat about well, I guess there's probably a broader question about costs with EVs compared to ICEs, which I know you touched on briefly. But what about in terms of some of the other things like insurance? Do you know anything about how the insurance compares between electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles in particular, and typical ICE vehicles, ICE vehicles?
So the insurance for a typical EV is about the same as it is for a typical gas vehicle. So there are some differences in some cases. So if you look at and I'm not paid by Tesla in any way, shape, or form, okay? But if you look at the Tesla vehicles, they're at the top of the safest vehicles tested by the National Highway Standard and whatever in whatever they are in the US. So they're very safe vehicles. So they result in less injury and less death when there are accidents, right? So the claims are smaller. So actually Tesla is, they've started in the US selling insurance because they believe that the insurance companies are gouging Tesla owners because the vehicles are so much safer, and the cost of accidents is so much lower. So, but for my personal experience, it was almost the same price between an 8-year-old minivan and a brand new Tesla Model S in 2013. Okay, so the insurance is not really any different.
That's great. No, that's really good information and a great question. Thanks for posting that in the chat. Yeah, some of those sort of other costs associated with vehicle ownership maybe don't come into the conversation as often.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, let's talk about other costs. So
Sure.
right now, the electric vehicles, especially the lower price ones, are more expensive than the equivalent gas vehicle in the same class of vehicle. So again, the Nissan Leaf is a good example there. It's more expensive than the equivalent Nissan vehicle of the same category, right? That's because batteries are still relatively expensive. The price is going down rapidly. The price of batteries went down about 90% between 2010 and 2020. So prices are coming down rapidly, and what causes electric vehicles to be more expensive, or has caused them to be more expensive in the past, is the cost of the battery, because the rest of the vehicle, if you look at the body of the vehicle and all that, it's really the same thing as a regular vehicle, and the electric motor costs a lot less to build than a gas or diesel engine. So it's the battery that makes a difference in terms of cost, and battery prices are still dropping significantly at almost 20% a year. So we're expecting that within a few years, even in the lower price categories, new electric cars will be less expensive than gas cars. So the upfront cost will be less, and that's quite important for the way dealers sell cars is by focusing on the monthly payment, which I think is somewhat ludicrous. And but if you look at the overall cost of ownership of a vehicle, it's not just a monthly payment that makes a difference. It's the maintenance cost and the fueling cost, right? So if you focus only on the monthly payment, and that's the way dealers are trained to sell vehicles, it'll be a higher payment for the equivalent electric car. So that's a disincentive for people to buy electric cars, although in the end, they may pay a lot less because they would pay less for electricity and maintenance. They often forego the electric car because of the upfront cost. So when that problem disappears in a few years, then we expect a lot more electric cars to be sold. And people who don't have the higher budgets will be able to take advantage of the lower cost of ownership that you get with an EV.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, definitely the cost is a barrier, I think, for a lot of people, or has been in the past. It's great that the federal government has the incentive that you were mentioning. I believe Plug and Drive, another organization, has a used EV incentive even. I don't know how available used EVs are, but maybe that relates to another question from the chat that I have here, which is something that I haven't actually thought about before, but is it possible to rent an electric vehicle, a zero emission vehicle? Do you see those out there, those options?
Yeah, so here in Canada, the only option I'm aware of that where you could rent an EV is on Turo. So I know of some people who were renting their EVs or are renting their EVs on Turo, but it's I don't believe there's any of the mainstream rental companies that are renting EVs in Canada at this point. Right, so there may be other organizations that are renting EVs too, but they would be smaller shops like Turo.
That's interesting. Do you have a sense of what the reason there is? Is it just sort of business as usual is easier and they're not making that shift yet? Or what's stopping a company like, say, Enterprise or Avis?
It's user familiarity, I think. If you look at the experience that Virtucar has had with electric vehicles, they've had some issues, and they're experimenting still, so they're trying to figure out how to work through this. But the issues they've had is that the people who use their vehicles are not used to plugging vehicles in and all that. So, putting gas in a car is something that people have lived with and have grown up with for 100 years now. So they're used to that. They're used to how to do that, right? Whereas charging a vehicle, they'd have to know where the charges are and all that. And if you're not a frequent EV user, you probably wouldn't know where the charges are. So they're having some difficulty figuring out how to make that work. And this would be even more of an issue with Avis or Enterprise or these other the bigger renters out there that would they'd have trouble getting their users to use the vehicles properly. I would personally love to see them rent electric cars, and that's what I would choose if I needed to rent a car again. But they're looking for the mass market, right? And the mass market at this point is not too familiar with how to handle an EV.
That makes sense, but course, it's a barrier that we hope will shrink over time as more people are sort of getting personally invested in these vehicles and getting that experience.
Yeah.
No, that makes complete sense to me. I have another question here, sort of switching over to talk a little bit about charging, which is someone asked if they will ever be moving over to like near field wireless charging. Is that an option for EVs? Is that something that is sort of being talked about in the industry?
So there is a lot of talk about that, and there's a lot of talk about that for heavy duty vehicles also. My feeling is that it's an interesting technology to explore, but I think that given the issues with the physics of the near field charging, so the near part being the biggest one, so you want the source, and it's like when you're doing that with a cell phone, it's really easy because you put the cell phone directly on the charger, right? Whereas with a vehicle, it's more difficult to get a close contact. You know, and it's less efficient to charge that way. So given that it's quite easy to plug in a vehicle, I'm not sure we're going to see near field have a significant role going forward. There's some people talking about that for roadways, where you would be able to roll down the roadway and charge through that as you're driving along. But then again, there's issues with cost and how close the vehicle would be to the charging source to be able to make that happen. So, you know, and if you look at bigger vehicles like buses, for example, buses require lots of electricity to run, and you would need very large surfaces to charge. So I'm not sure that the physics and economics make sense there, but it's certainly something that's being explored by a number of different people out there.
Yeah, really interesting question. That all makes sense. It's something that we're seeing lots of in other areas, obviously, like you mentioned with cell phones and stuff, but I totally see those barriers, cars sitting up off the ground.
Yeah.
We have a question here about, I guess this is again related to maintenance a little bit, but do electric vehicles rust more or the same or less than sort of internal combustion vehicles if they're not rust proofed? Again, sort of Ottawa, the winter context. You were saying mostly the body is fairly similar to an ICE vehicle. Are there any other differences in terms of sort of rust in that regard?
Well, it all depends on the vehicle. So if you look at some of the Teslas, they're almost all aluminum. So you still have corrosion in aluminum, but a lot less than on steel. So it's a different situation. But the electric vehicles don't rust more. The corrosion problem actually with vehicles in general, and the earlier Teslas in particular, has to do with the interface between the aluminum parts and the steel parts. So if you know anything about the electrochemistry behind it, if you have different metals touching each other, one of them will rust and the other one will not, right? And won't go into all the details, but that could cause some excessive rusting of some parts, right? But that's not a Tesla or electric car specific situation. Any other car with aluminum would have the same problem. So no, there aren't any. They shouldn't rust any more than conventional vehicles, even here in Canada.
That's great, and good question too. Again, something that may not come up too often. We had a quick question too. This is maybe a little broader, but still worth mentioning. Do you or any of the manufacturers, for that matter, sort of have an awareness of the environmental issues around mining lithium for batteries, that kind of thing? Is this something that the industry is addressing or acknowledging at least?
Okay, so let me tackle that one. So the first thing I'll say is that there is a well-funded campaign by the oil industry to try to discredit EVs from a number of perspectives, whether it's environmental or others. There's also talk about child labor in mining cobalt in the Congo for electric vehicles. The first thing I'll say is that's like there's a well-funded, and I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars a year spent on trying to spread disinformation, because the oil companies, they have a business they want to keep on running, and they don't want to see EVs take over the market. Okay, now let's talk about the specifics about lithium. So lithium is mined in two ways. There's either brine that's pumped out of the soil, and this is happening in Chile in particular. They pull out brine, and the mines in question, they refine lithium from the brine, but the mines in question are actually potassium mines. And they take out the lithium as a byproduct of the potassium mining. So, so the mines in question were already there doing potassium, but they're now extracting the lithium. The processing of that lithium to make batteries out of it involves some nasty chemicals, which have an environmental impact, right? Now, that being said, if you compare that to the environmental impact of refining fuel, it's nowhere near as big, right? So if you look at fueling a car, every time you fuel your car, you're putting in some product that's had a pollution impact, if you will, on the planet, right? Whereas when you're using a lithium ion battery, that battery gets built once and it gets used for, we're thinking now at least 12 years and up to 20 years. And afterwards, the product will be recycled and put into a new battery, right? Whereas the petroleum that you are using for your gas or diesel car is burnt, and you have to pump new product to fill a tank every time, right? So it's really it's comparing apples to oranges. And if you look at overall, the environmental issue with lithium is much smaller than it is with petroleum cars. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't an impact, and so that particular way of mining lithium has certain impacts. The other way of mining lithium, most of the lithium actually comes from Australia and is mined from hard rocks. So it's a different mineral, different processes and all that. And those mines also use, like every other mine, they use some chemicals to process the product, right? So if you look at other mines that mine all the other stuff that we use as raw materials, they all have some nastiness of some sort in terms of environmental impact and tailings ponds and all this, right? Really no different from for lithium. There are, though, some companies working on processes that are both cheaper and better for the environment, use less or no harmful chemicals. And as demand for lithium increases, we're expecting to see more of that. If you go to the child labor thing, which is something I hear about very often, one of the things that's not well known is that currently the oil industry uses as much cobalt to refine petroleum as what is used in car batteries. Okay, so just to know that when you're pumping gas that you're putting in your car, you are supporting the alleged use of child labor in the Congo. Now, the other thing about that is 60% of the world's supply of cobalt comes from the Congo. About 10% of that 60% comes from illicit mines, which may or may not have child labor. So it's a small portion. Nobody supports child labor or that kind of thing, right? Obviously, but it's a very small proportion of the cobalt that may be mined by child labor, right? And if you look at the pictures that are being used in the media to talk about mining in the cobalt and child exploitation in the cobalt, they're actually pictures of gold mines in the cobalt in Congo that actually have child laborers there. Okay, so again, if you're buying anything out there, there's a possibility that it's being made by, some portion is being made by child labor somewhere. So electric vehicles are not pristine to the environment by no measure. They have an environmental footprint, but their environmental footprint is much better than that of gas or diesel cars.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for all that detail. I mean, it does make sense. There's still mining happening, but it is interesting, as you pointed out, the way that that conversation is framed around electric vehicles rather than sort of the mining industry more generally and resource extraction on the whole.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm conscious of the fact that we're getting close to time, and we actually do have a few more questions to get through. It's obviously been a fascinating presentation for everybody, so I'm going to rush through them quick. Someone was asking if you have any idea if the purchases of EVs in general are rising annually, or by how much? Like, are we seeing a lot more uptake year to year? Is it staying pretty consistent? Do you know?
Well, it depends which jurisdiction you're talking about. So sales are positively booming in Europe right now. Market share has more than doubled from 2019 to 2020. Excuse me, in Europe. So in many countries, market share is well above 10%. In Canada, it's growing, but the numbers are smaller. So right now, I don't remember the latest numbers, but last year I believe we were around 4% for light vehicles. Now in Canada, a lot of our light vehicles are pickup trucks, right? So there are currently well, actually, there's just one pickup truck that was introduced to market in the last few weeks. That's a Rivian, but there are no pickup trucks really available in Canada at this moment. There will be a number of them available next year, including the Ford F-150 Lightning, which we believe will take up a large share of the market. But we believe that at this point, the market is it's been growing exponentially for the last couple of years, and we expect it to continue growing exponentially until virtually every car sold. And we think by 2030, virtually every car sold in Canada by 2030, we believe will be electric.
That's fantastic and very exciting. I've got two more questions here that I'm going to just put to you maybe together, maybe a two-parter here so you have some time to answer. But someone was saying, they're very new to this, but I still think it's a fascinating question. Are there any cars out there that use solar power, or is that something that the industry would be looking to do, like cars with solar panels, for example, to do some charging, or is that not an efficient strategy? And sorry, my other part of that question, if I can throw it in there, is you were talking a bit about hydrogen fuel cells. Do you see a real potential for those to be produced in a greener, sort of more environmentally friendly way in the future? Do either of those sort of alternatives, theoretical alternatives, look good for charging electric vehicles?
Okay, so the first one, solar. Solar, unfortunately, it's very hard to justify the cost of putting solar in a car for the amount of energy it produces, because the car surface is just not big enough. If you're talking about the side or the top of a transport van, for example, that's a bit of a different story. There may be a case to be made there to do that, but I don't believe it's economically feasible for some time yet, if ever, to do that on a vehicle. Plus, if you look at my vehicle, it's typically stored in the garage all the time, so it doesn't get much sun anyway, so I wouldn't be able to take advantage of it. Now, for the green hydrogen, okay, so I see a future for green hydrogen, absolutely, but if you look at the current landscape of the hydrogen market, there's already about $100 billion a year of hydrogen being sold worldwide, produced and sold worldwide, mostly from hydrocarbon sources. That hydrogen should be replaced by green hydrogen first before we put it in cars or other vehicles, because the reason they use hydrogen has to do with the chemistry of the processes in question. And here we're talking, the big one here is steel making. Requires actually, steel making is a bit of an aside, but before we go there, making fertilizers and ammonia and a few other things that are made industrially in large quantities from hydrogen. Those are things that we need to keep on doing for other reasons, and we should replace the hydrocarbon-based hydrogen with green hydrogen instead. The problem right now with green hydrogen is the cost of green hydrogen is about 4 or 5 times the cost of the gray or brown hydrogen that's made from hydrocarbons. So, but we're seeing the cost of green hydrogen dropping dramatically, and I'm hoping that within a decade or so, it will be competitive with the hydrocarbon based one. Now, the reason we think it's never going to be a good solution for light vehicles doesn't have to do with its greenness. It has to do with the efficiency of the whole thing. So if you're producing green hydrogen, what you're doing is you're using electricity through hydrolysis to separate water into hydrogen and oxygen. And if you look at the round trip efficiency of doing that, and you put it in a fuel cell and turn it back into water, the round trip efficiency, we're talking about 30% or less, and actually potentially quite less. So it's better than gas, and about the same, maybe a bit better than diesel. But if you take that same electricity and you put it in a car battery instead, you'll go 3 or 4 times further. So just that means that it will always be less expensive to put the electricity directly in a car battery than it will be to use it to do hydrolysis to get the hydrogen, the green hydrogen, and then put it in the fuel cell. Okay, so it's really a physics and chemistry barrier that there's just no way to get around. It's just the laws of nature, the laws of thermodynamics that keep us from doing better.
That's great. Great answer. So it sounds like there's a place for hydrogen after all, but maybe not so much in ZEVs, but replacing the sources of dirty hydrogen, as I like to say, that we already have. So that's great. We'll wrap up now since we have come to the end of the hour. I'm glad everyone was so enthusiastic. It was a great presentation. So thank you very much again, Raymond, for joining us today and sharing all those insights. Thanks as well to all of our attendees who joined us, who are still here, who took the time today. If you liked the session, don't forget to check out all the other upcoming events and activities we have this week. You can learn more about zero emissions vehicles, of course, and Drive Green Ottawa is presented by EnviroCentre in partnership with the City of Ottawa. Special thanks to Hydro Ottawa, EVCO, and Plug and Drive. To stay up to date, please sign up for our newsletter. Mandy has posted some links in the chat already. Yeah. Thank you very much again, Raymond. Anyone who has follow-up questions, I'm sure we'll be sending out a follow-up email to participants. So I'm sure they'll have a chance to connect with you if they need to. And as Raymond mentioned, there's a meeting tonight for EVCO if anyone's interested.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Bye.